Carbohydrates. In this chapter, we will go over the much-debated topic of carbohydrates. For more than 2 decades, the need for and effects of carbohydrates have been hotly debated. Some say they are vital. Some say they are outright poisonous. Here, we'll approach this topic with a clear mind and using scientific evidence. First off, what is the role of carbohydrates in human biology? Carbohydrates are the primary fuel for cell energy, and they are the fastest source. Carbohydrates are essential for the function of the organs and tissues that need them most, the brain being the main contender. Our brain must get around 125 grams of carbohydrates every day. What happens when we don't offer this amount to our brains daily? No, we don't end up brain dead. Instead, our liver starts to break down our glycogen storage, which is around 400 to 700 grams of glucose stored in our liver and muscles. But what happens if those reserves are depleted? Our brain still won't suffer. Instead, the body's smart biology starts to turn its own protein into glucose in a process called gluconeogenesis. This protein comes mainly from muscle tissue and can lead to muscle wasting and a lowered metabolic rate. Besides the brain, where else are carbohydrates needed? As previously stated, glucose is the quickest energy source when compared to fatty acids and ketone bodies. As a result, our bodies require more carbohydrates as we engage in more intense physical activity. For example, while we sleep, sit, or walk, our muscles can function normally using mostly fat energy. When we lift weights, run, swim, or walk upstairs, our muscle cells require quick energy from carbohydrates. If it doesn't get it, it begins to break down muscle protein and convert it to glucose, as we've previously discussed. So, the more active you are, especially if you engage in high-intensity physical activity, where your heart rate rises, the more dietary carbohydrates you require to fuel your muscles and prevent muscle protein breakdown. How much? It is difficult to provide precise figures because our metabolisms and levels of physical activity vary greatly from person to person. A passive person can begin with around 40% of daily dietary energy coming from carbohydrates. A very active person, endurance athletes for example, might have 70% plus of their energy coming from carbohydrates. Most of us fall somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. A good starting point is to get 50% of your daily energy from carbohydrates. But we're all different. That means you'll have to start somewhere and see what works for you. How do you know if you're getting enough carbohydrates? It's a fairly common problem, and some symptoms can indicate whether your body requires more carbohydrates, assuming that you are not deficient in other nutrients. The most common symptoms are fatigue, dizziness, a craving for food that doesn't always help with eating, sleeping problems, an elevated heart rate, decreased physical and mental performance, and occasionally thirst. If you have these symptoms for more than a couple of days, you should gradually increase your carbohydrate intake. When you start to feel better, you know you've met your carbohydrate intake goal. There is no reason for you to suffer from eating too few carbohydrates. It will not help you lose fat faster. On the contrary, your metabolism will slow down. But how do you know if you're eating too many carbohydrates? This one is tricky because your body will not give you any obvious signs. That is why it is so easy to become overweight through carbohydrate overload over time and not notice any difference. However, there is a bright side to this. There is no problem eating a little more carbohydrates than your body requires at the time, as long as you get the right amount of overall calories per day. All of the extra carbohydrates, like the fat you consume, will be used for fuel. There is no significant difference in getting 45% or 55% of your overall calories from carbohydrates. The point is that eating carbohydrates in excess of your minimum requirement is not a cause for concern, as long as they come from quality sources and your overall calorie consumption is balanced. What should you do first? It's relatively easy. The first step is to eliminate everything from your diet that you don't need, isn't natural, or provides no health benefits. What's left after that is often sufficient. Following that, it is time to incorporate some healthy carbohydrate sources into your diet. What are the good sources of carbohydrates that you should eat? They have two things in common. They contain good fiber and are so-called slow carbohydrates. Slow meaning that they take much longer to absorb in your digestive tract and won't cause a spike in your blood sugar and insulin. It's known as a low glycemic index. Most natural carbohydrate sources have a low to the medium glycemic index. Fast-absorbing carbohydrates are mostly found in processed foods. The best carbohydrate sources are fiber-rich vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, carrots, leek, spinach, asparagus, zucchini, Brussels sprouts, radishes, and so on. How many vegetables should you eat a day? Aim for at least 500 grams or 18 ounces. The more the better. Don't worry, no one in history has gotten fat on broccoli. 500 grams or 18 ounces fills the stomach very nicely, contains lots of fiber, slow-absorbing carbohydrates, and other healthy nutrients. Whole grains and cereals like oats, buckwheat, quinoa, and rice. Whole grains have a good composition of micronutrients like vitamins and minerals, and different kinds of fiber. Whole grains are the best option to fill your daily carbohydrate needs. Oatmeal, whole grain bread, muesli, or even popcorn with no added fat or sugar. Fruits and berries. Fruits and berries contain an amazing combination of micronutrients and health-promoting flavonoids and antioxidants that you can't get anywhere else. In general, they have the highest glycemic index of natural carbohydrate sources. As a result, they work well as pre- or post-workout meals or as breakfast after a fast. So to summarize, there is no need or reason to restrict carbohydrate consumption excessively. It might cause more harm than good. You should aim to get the minimum amount of carbohydrate from the best sources. Usually, it is at least 40% of all calories, but we are all different and have different needs. If you don't feel well or are more physically active, increase your carbohydrate intake. The best carbohydrate sources are low-carb vegetables, at least 500 grams or 18 ounces per day. Whole grains, cereals, fruits, and berries. Of course, some carbs come from protein and fat sources, such as seeds and cottage cheese, so they contribute to the total. Don't be afraid of carbs. Besides fast energy, you'll get many nutrients like fiber, vitamins, and flavonoids that you won't get from other sources.